Hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me? If there is a problem with my internet connection, I'll turn my screen off and that will help, I hope, but I'll try and avoid having to do that. Well, good evening and Happy New Year to you all. And may I firstly say a huge thank you to Mary for keeping in touch over many, many, many months, if not years, in building a close working relationship throughout the time that I was seeing off my period as a member of the European Parliament. That for me truly was 15 very memorable years. It was a tremendous honour, privilege and pleasure representing the northwest of England at a European level. And it's really nice to see Teresa again this evening, to be sharing this platform with her. So yeah, Michael and I shared a platform previously also. Just a few things really that I want to go through. I'd prefer to add to what the previous two speakers have already mentioned rather than repeat what they have said. But I really do feel that this whole idea of get Brexit done has very quickly become get done by Brexit. Because every aspect of this agreement that I've looked at does nothing but actually take away. It doesn't add anything from a UK perspective in terms of any of the promised benefits and additions that were made during the referendum campaign. And the words that were used by the President of the European Commission were relief and satisfaction. And I'm afraid I feel neither of those, but I completely understand their perspective, the remaining European Union's perspective, as to why they should feel relief and satisfaction with matters coming and finally. Now, the whole idea of Brexit was always, by those who were behind this project, that it was a step-by-step and by any means necessary exercise. They clearly always had an agenda which goes far beyond the removal of UK from the European Union, but that was the very first step and an essential first step that needed to be achieved. And in doing so, they have already dismantled so much of the structures that we had built our country upon. And I was really pleased to hear both of the former speakers. Teresa also highlighted the way in which EU citizens who were in the United Kingdom, resident in the United Kingdom, had been treated. Now, actually, that was the very first step that ought to have sent alarm bells ringing for this reason. What we had done there is we had citizens who had exercised their legal rights to come to the United Kingdom. And we basically forced them to re-regularize their already regular status in order to be able to remain in the United Kingdom. Now that was a fundamental rewriting of the very basis upon which our constitutional order and legal order is built. And that is that legal rights, once given, cannot retrospectively be taken away. But that is exactly what we did through the back door with EU citizens, by making them re-regularize their already regular status. Now, the problem with an action like that is that any administration, any government or series of governments that actually get away with an action like that, then it doesn't stop there. That's the first step. and matters move on from there. And we've got to be absolutely ready now that there will be further exercises that build upon what they have already, as they would see it, achieved. And it was very interesting, actually, earlier today to see, and I know this has already been mentioned in the chat forum, that Daniel Hannan, soon to be Lord Hannan, announced today that actually we ought to be taking steps immediately to scrap EU consumer and worker protections as an immediate first step post-Brexit. So the mask is now well and truly off, because they promise time and time again that these are the things that they would not be pushing for. But that is exactly what they are doing. If you look at what is happening at the Council of Europe today, you will see that steps are already underway by the same protagonists for the United Kingdom to actually weaken the Council of Europe from within and use that as a rallying tool for the UK to leave the Council of Europe ultimately. Now, that will be a further disaster upon a disaster scenario of us having left the European Union, but they are well and truly working on this. And it's at a very advanced stage. Now, what does all of this actually lead to? And this is something that worries me greatly, because I am a unionist. I believed in the union of the European Union, and I also believe in the union of the United Kingdom. But ultimately, all unions are built upon shared values. And where those shared values are compromised or broken or changed, you then find a situation where slowly but surely that union starts to weaken. And that's exactly what we are seeing here today. The position of Scotland has been clear, to my mind, right from the outset. Scotland's position has been that they wanted to remain within the United Kingdom and thereby within the European Union. And when they were given two referendums, they clearly made their position exactly that and known to be that. But today they are seeing that they are being brought out of the European Union by England. They are also seeing that so many of the shared values that bound the Union of the United Kingdom together are now being dismantled. And they're being dismantled by the right wing, the very right wing of England, who have managed to get their hands on the levers of power. Now, this is going to fundamentally weaken those of us who would like for the United Kingdom to remain intact. I think it's fairly clear what the Scottish election results are going to be. And on this, and I don't make this as a political point at all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Keir Starmer as an individual, but I am fundamentally puzzled by the logic that he has applied in supporting Boris Johnson's Brexit position. Because what he has done, he has placed England on one side of the argument, and I believe he's done it to appease English Brexiteers in the red wall seats, and he has isolated Scotland. And actually, if we were to have any hope of politically saving the United Kingdom, we need Labour to be strengthened in Scotland from the position that it is currently in today. And now, please, I do not make these remarks on a party political basis. I'm speaking as a Briton who believes in the union of the United Kingdom, because if that union goes, then frankly, what is left? Not very much indeed. And just very quickly, in order to sum up, and just getting back to the actual deal itself, Where do we, where are things going to head from here? Well, firstly, I think one of the things that we're all going to be hearing far more of is non-tariff barriers, because this particular agreement, the only so-called, you can call it that, achievement, something with and tariffs, it doesn't do any tariff barriers. So we absolutely have to get ready for hearing story upon story coming out in the coming months of how non-tariff barriers are having tremendously negative impact. And I know the fishing communities have already felt the brunt of that over the last couple of days already. And then secondly, and this point was made by Michael, in relation to security cooperation, I think this is going to be one of the big areas where the public are really going to be shaken into thinking that maybe we have done something that we were better off remaining a part of, because at some stage there's going to be a security situation where our having left the European Union actually impedes and harms our ability to fight certainly terrorist activities and other data sharing activities that are required, regardless of what the Home Secretary may be claiming at this moment in time. And I think the very real effects of that, and particularly with the views of our police associations, when the public get to see the real effects of that, that is something that's going to really hit home. And then we have this whole issue of replacing the single market with new deals that are going to be struck, particularly with Commonwealth countries. Now, the wheels on this are already starting to come off, and they will become apparent within the next 12 months or so on both fronts. One, the losses of market access, particularly for the services sector, coupled with the lack of new market access for goods and services that will become apparent and start to play through very, very soon indeed. The one interesting thing that did come forward this week was research that was conducted by Mr. Curtis regarding the linkage between freedom of movement and market access, and how that still remains very confused in people's minds. And the whole issue of immigration as compared to freedom of movement, as compared to asylum, remains very confused in people's minds. And whilst people were willing to accept that regulation, EU regulation in most part is actually a good thing to retain, on immigration, however, the opposite has occurred, where people are now taking the view that actually freedom of movement needs to be curbed and we need to have far more control over our immigration, and therefore seeing this as a major achievement. But of course, it may well be that once people begin to realize that freedom of movement is a two-way street and not just a one-way activity that was being carried out, then that will, possibly the position on that will move as well. And then very, very finally, on Northern Ireland, I think the thing to watch out for there is the developments in Southern Ireland that are going to take place in relation to healthcare reforms. At the time that Brexit was still being negotiated, when I was still an MEP, it was very clear that the polling that was coming back was far too risky for a border to be agreed down the Irish Sea, because the figures from the polling that were coming back made it very risky that under the Good Friday Agreement, if any poll did take place, it was far too close to call. And one of the issues, underlying issues, is, of course, the healthcare sector in Southern Ireland, as being one of the factors that would persuade people in Northern Ireland to remain in the United Kingdom. Now, the reforms that are taking place, which is a good thing, but the reforms that are taking place in Southern Ireland on a healthcare basis will take away one of the main arguments that unionists would have to try and persuade people to remain in the UK as opposed to a reunified Ireland. So having said that, if any, I'd be very happy to adopt an Irish grandmother. I don't have one, but if anybody has one going spare, please let me know. I'd be delighted to take up that particular offer. And then all I can say is, as a former parliamentarian, the so-called taking back of control and parliamentary scrutiny that has happened over this particular process and this particular so-called deal has been far from laughable. I think it's a matter of great shame for a country like ours that calls itself a democracy. Mary, thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone on beyond my time.